Welcome to Mostly Minutia. I'm Colleen Lindell, and this is episode 41, A Man and His Boy, a Father's Day story. So this story was recorded back in January of this year, and originally I had thought I was going to air it in February, but as time has gone on, I have felt it was more of a Father's Day story, and I think that you will agree with me. So this is an interview with Cruz Flores, and to put it at its very simplest, it is about the birth of his son, Henry. Cruz is a fellow podcaster. He co-hosts a show with his friend James Kislingberry. The show is called Equality Interruption, and if you are a lover of all things film, the good films as well as the bad and the very, very bad, then you will absolutely love this show. Just a few notes. At the beginning of this interview, Cruz and I are talking about our individual childhoods when both of us had to switch schools and move from different cities. At one point, Cruz asked me to share a story which leads us into an entire discussion on popularity, the confusion of popularity, social dynamics, expectations, and then the navigation of fitting in with peers, or in my case, the not fitting in with peers. And so if you are in no way interested in hearing this very severe but poignant tangent, then please move forward to about the 29-minute mark where Cruz's story actually begins. Also, at one point, I talk about Cruz showing an immense amount of hospitality at our podcast collective gathering. That is a community I've been trying to put together in Los Angeles to try to get other podcasters together. So that's the story with that. And then lastly, I don't usually know which episode will be next. This time I do. A few months ago on my Instagram, I had posted a picture of my friend Hillary Carroll holding a piece of paper outlining her 9 student loans she had been faithfully paying off for the last 3 years. Hillary's student loan debt totaled $130,000. This had paid for her master's in cinematography from UCLA. And due to responses from several people wanting to know how Hillary managed to pay off this debt, Hillary and I did an entire interview focusing on that very question. So that episode will be up in the next few weeks, and I will be sure to direct message the people who direct messaged me to let you know when that is out. So now, here is Cruz Flores. So I'm actually wondering if we could spend this time, not to make you retell the story, but...
Oh, I kind of figured, at least part of it would be.
Yeah.
In fact, I was wondering if you wanted to just say a little bit. You had a really good story you were telling me before about yourself, your own experience moving, and I thought it was really interesting. And I wondered if you wanted to include that, because it was so interesting to me in relation to what I was saying, that I was like, it kept with me.
You mean when we were talking about like you moving to the desert and then moving to LA? And
you said that you moved from a place that was very multicultural, where people didn't seem to, where social hierarchy was not considered that important, and where you ended up being a place where it was very important.
Yeah. So for the first 9 years of my life, I lived in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, on the west side. My parents put my sister and my brother and I all in Montessori school. And when we were in school together, all the kids it was like Latino, African American, Asian. I mean, everybody, it was like just such a conglomerate mix of us. And I had never, the concept of popularity had never crossed my mind, even. It was just like, as kids, even that age, what is that, 3rd and 4th grade, I just had a good time hanging with those little kids.
Right.
And then we moved to this considerably smaller city called Oconomowoc, which has an O between every consonant.
Oconomowoc.
Yeah, and it's a very wealthy community, practically all white. I was switched from Montessori to public school, and they had us take an exam. And I guess I like passed the exam in some way. I don't even remember what it was.
Yeah, I remember those. In California, it was called the GATE program, I believe.
Okay.
Because it was the same every school I went to. And yeah, they put you in a more advanced class.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Well, I think they were just trying to see if I was at like the reading level of a fourth grader. They were trying to, because I wasn't really in a grade before that. So they were trying to place me in a grade. And I didn't know that at the time. I just had to go in and read in front of teachers. And then I had to answer some math questions. And anyway, yeah, I remember starting school and some of the kids that I was in class with said, oh, so-and-so is the most popular person here. But she's not usually the most popular. The girl who is the most popular girl is gone this year in Paris with her family. So I was like, it developed all these questions inside of me. And another weird thing is like everybody went to church on Sundays. I was raised in Milwaukee, I don't remember if kids went to church or not. It was just people were doing whatever. And we were raised without religion or faith of any sort. So that was really strange. And then, this popularity thing, I was like, what is popularity? And, like, why is this person more popular versus some of the other kids in class? Like, what is it? Why is there a hierarchy here? It was very strange to me. And I remember this one girl, the girl that was quote unquote popular, she would walk around the playground at recess and all of these other kids would follow her. And I didn't follow because I was just confused about what was happening.
Yeah, the idea of codifying it and making it so that everybody has to be on the same page with it.
I just immediately, I had no idea how to fit that grid. Yeah. I was like, I don't even have wiring for what's happening because my brain just like couldn't even comprehend it.
I don't know. It wasn't that strict in Palm Springs, but it was certainly more pronounced. And then once I got to Los Angeles in high school, it was so large that people just couldn't, there was no way to have everybody be on the same page because you weren't seeing the same people. You might see one out of several hundred people, your whole time. So it didn't have that sense of like, and I'm not sure if Santa Barbara did much either, but I do remember there was a big change between either of those and Palm Springs specifically. I think it's the limited amount of people that does it, and I don't know. Sometimes kids get it in their heads that they got to have things spelled out, to have like rules and a structure to their social interactions.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I've never really understood those rules. Like I still to this day don't really get it.
Yeah.
I can't really fit into it. And actually a lot of things that have come across my path where I'm expected to fit into some sort of mold, I immediately just feel like a failure with it. I'm like, well, I'm never going to be able to do this. I can't fit into somebody's weird expectations. Like, instead of people enjoying Colleen for Colleen, it's like, you will do this, Colleen, and then we will enjoy you for you. That idea of fitting into a predetermined slot that people have for where you fit in their world. Yeah, it's a very strange thing to encounter, and you don't encounter it everywhere. It's just, you realize that people have made a kind of fiefdom in their social order that, like, putting everybody in a particular place, but then you just step out of it just like, a little bit, and you realize it doesn't affect anything else. Yeah. But I have a question for you though. When did you start feeling the pressure of like the expectation? Because you and I had talked about the pressure of expectation.
Expectation of what?
Like interacting with people.
I don't know. I feel like it went back nearly as long as I can remember. I can't think of a perfect time where it seemed very easy. I think it was because I always had too much of an expectation of people around me to always give feedback that, you know, what I was doing was okay, and that it was, you know, that they wanted to be around me, and that I was, you know, entertaining and everything. And so that, I think that pressure, you know, it started out very small with like, you know, you figure out, well, if I buy a candy from the snack machine, you know, I'll share it with somebody, and then they'll be around me for the rest of the day. Or, you know, if I talk about this subject, then they'll want to talk about this subject, you know. And I think that just ended up giving me a lot of anxiety, even really small, to really think about those kinds of things of how I can extend an experience farther. It took me a really long time before I could just accept that you can have a nice social interaction, and then it could just, that's it.
Right.
You don't have to try and continue it forever.
Right.
I don't know. Looking back now, it feels like it was something that was kind of always there in me, that I just wanted to have these relationships and these interactions be continuous instead of just letting them be as they are and natural and organic. It wasn't anything in the environment. It was just something in me that I had to eventually figure out that, you know, it's okay. You talk with some people and you have a very nice interaction with them. And then once that's over, you go on to something else, and it's okay. You know?
Right. We don't have to like try to like do something extra special to keep them around or something.
Yeah.
They're just choosing to be around because they want to be around. And it's okay. We go and we do other things, and then we'll probably come back around to that person again.
Yeah, exactly. You know, and I don't think it was anything that I was growing up with in my family or anything like that. I don't think it was anything that I was raised with. I think it's just something that, I don't know, I got in my head, or was part of my personality early, and then it made things kind of difficult for me.
You know, I feel like also we're like learning how to socialize with our peers. And I think, you know, it's interesting to be around lots of different kinds of personalities and figure out the navigation of that. It's a lot of learning curves. If you think about it, like there's a lot of stuff going on with adolescence.
Yeah, exactly.
It's rough.
It's a rough time to try and figure those things out. And some people figure them out easy, and some people take a really long time to figure them out. It was just a thing that it took me a little trouble, and I still have trouble with it.
Yeah, I was going to ask you, like, what's it like these days, like being an adult, and you're married now, and you're a father, and
even being married, even being an adult. Sometimes, you know, I still have those feelings of like, well, why don't you want to hang out, or why don't you want to just spend just a little bit more time doing this thing? Or what will come up now is I'll want to do a project, you know, a writing or performing or just doing something. You know, we've talked before about that LA thing of like people will say, yeah, and then it'll kind of dwindle out. And it's taken me a while to kind of get used to it, that's the way things, you know, are in Los Angeles specifically, that people will say, sure, okay, agree to things, and then not follow through. It took me a while of being, you know, really kind of upset about it. And even now, if I see people saying, you know, yes to one thing, and, you know, I've asked them to do something, I'll still be a little hurt by it, you know. I know that it could be a million things or not anything. And I just have to kind of go on. But, you know, I'm a 30-something old man with a wife and kid, and it still affects me. So never goes away. Yeah. And you're right. Like, it could be like a number of different things. And I think people have really good intentions of showing up for stuff. But so when you show up for something, I feel like you always keep it 100. Like, I feel like you
bring the best of yourself to
I try
things.
to.
Like even our podcast collective little group hangout a few weeks ago, you brought things with you.
Yeah, I mean,
it was really cool. You brought cake.
And
you brought wine.
I try, part of that is, I always like to make everybody comfortable. Mm-hmm. But see, that also comes from the fact that I also have in me still those feelings of like, I gotta make this correct. I gotta make everything turn out well. And I don't even have an end game. I don't even have like an ultimate goal to it. I just have to be like, this has to turn out right. Yeah. And I have to remind myself, there's no right. There's no correct. There's no, perfect ending. It just is going to be what it is. But those feelings are still there. And so I realize I can intellectualize it and, understand it all I want, but I still have those feelings. Mm-hmm. So now what I try to do is turn those feelings into good action. I know I'll feel better no matter what happens if, I show up on time and I bring something nice and, I'll feel better about it. Mm-hmm. And then whatever happens, I can go back and say, well, no, I took all those steps. I did everything I could. Even if I'm left with a feeling of like, well, that could have gone better. I'll say, no. You took all of the steps correctly. And that part I can make correct. The things that I have in control, the things that I have control of, I can make correct. Mm-hmm. So instead of, as when I was younger, I would try to make the other people's actions be correct and be like, oh, the end point has to be them feeling like this and them doing this. I'll say, okay, if I do these things that are just pleasant things, right. They're just, normal everyday things of being your best self and, treating people nicely and being polite. Mm-hmm. I'll do those things and I'll say, those are the things in my control. And then no matter what happens, I know I did that part. And if I focus on that, then whatever happens is okay. Mm-hmm. I understand the rest. Whatever else happens, it's not even now. I at least now realize that there's no perfect solution or perfect resolution that could happen that would make me feel okay.
Right.
There is no perfect outcome. The perfect outcome is me doing those things that I have control over that make things easier for everybody else. Mm-hmm.
That's perspective, then, right?
Yeah. That's what that's
what
I've gotten.
Maturity.
Yeah, that's the closest thing I've gotten to maturity. I'm still having those feelings that I had as a child, but just trying to put them into a place that is actually productive.
Yeah.
For me and for other people.
And the question I have is it excellence or because perfectionism and excellence are two different things. Mm-hmm. So is it that you just strive for excellence or that you do actually want something to be perfect?
I think what I've gotten to now is I would like my preparation. I would like those things, those few things that I have control of every time. I would like those things to be perfect. Mm-hmm. And then the rest, like occasionally I'll worry about excellence when they're in my control, but when they're not, I won't even consider like that part of it as something that I have to worry about. Okay. I'll completely compartmentalize the preparation and the beginnings and the parts that I can do.
That sounds really good.
Yeah.
That sounds like a healthy place to be.
Yeah, somewhat.
Yeah.
I mean, obviously there's always things that are out of control that you don't realize.
Right.
And that can get me really frustrated, when you're like, well, I thought I could do this perfectly beforehand, but even this part, and those are the things that can really trip me up. Those tiny little inconveniences and frustrations. I won't get upset the first time, but like all it takes is maybe 3 or 4 in a very short period of time. And suddenly I'll just feel like the world is ending.
Do you have an example that you're thinking of right now or that you have run up against lately?
It's not even anything, memorable. It's just tiny little things.
Tedious little things.
Yeah, tedious little things like missing the trash when you're putting trash in, or water splashing when you try to wash your hands, or just stubbing your foot when you're walking through a doorway. Like those kinds of things, like I won't even think about if I'm just going through my normal day. But if I'm trying to go through a particular procedure and I'm starting to get frustrated, I'll start to pay attention to how many come in a row.
Right.
And then I'll start to get frustrated. Like if it's just one thing, I'll just be like, okay, you know what? I don't have to think about it. But then like a bunch of things will come up. Or like, okay, here's an example. I meant to have something nice to bring right now.
Okay.
But there wasn't time. I could have come a little bit later, but I wanted to be closer to the time that I said. And even then I was just a little bit late. So I was like, I had to decide, do I want to be much later or do I want to do the thing? And of course, this wouldn't even occur to you as a dilemma that I would have.
I mean, you brought your lavender shirt.
That should be close enough.
Yeah.
Just that happening doesn't really affect me at all. All it would have taken was like a little bit more traffic, and then something, noticing something wrong with the car, and then maybe if I couldn't find your place, if all of those things kind of started to came together, I would have come in a horrible mood because I would have just had like, all it would take is like maybe 4 things that I thought of in preparation that, of trying to be prepared, going wrong, of things that I thought I had in control. Just put me in a terrible mood. And the thing of it is, sometimes things like that have happened, and things have still gone okay. So I keep that in my mind too.
I know it's never as bad as we're making it out in our brains. And people are much more forgiving than we give them credit.
Yes,
for.
very much so.
Yeah.
At the same time, that also means that they've kind of made their decision far earlier than we think sometimes.
Oh, what? You think that they're like, oh, well, we know Cruz is always late.
Yeah, exactly.
No.
Or they've made their decision about like what kind of a person you are, or what they expect to happen. So you just making some faux pas or doing something a little bit, not exactly as you wanted, won't make that much of a difference, because they've already said, they've already put in their mind, yes, but if there's if it's a no, it's like, well, nothing you do is gonna matter much.
No, okay, so this mindset, because I understand this mindset, but I actually think that, like for me personally, I'm just happy to be around you. So if you show up somewhere, like I was so happy that you came to the podcast party.
Yeah, I know.
I like your presence there meant everything to me. So it's like, I have to think that we're much harder on ourselves than the others around us. I think other people are just so happy to receive you or myself.
Right.
Now, I think like my mentality with this stuff about, perfection and high expectation goes back to my childhood. Totally. And the way that my parents dealt with me as a kid.
Yeah.
But I don't want to hold on to this type of thought process anymore. I feel like because I just like being around people.
Right.
And if like if someone is super late, or I know I was telling you this, if they break plans with me consistently, I'll just get straight up pissed.
Yeah.
And I'm like, you don't regard me. We're not hanging out anymore.
Yeah.
And I'll just cut the person out of my life.
I feel the same way. I end up doing the same thing. And it's with people who make promises that they'll do things, or that they'll professionally help each other out, and then they don't come through, not just once but like several times. It'll start to be a thing where I'll say, I eventually have to look at it as like, look, I'm trying to create a social net here, and you're not a part of it. Like, I can try and figure out what's wrong, and like see if it's like something with you that maybe I could help with. If you don't want that help, or if it doesn't matter, if it's not help you need at all, you're just not, it's something else completely. If you're just not interested.
Yeah.
then I gotta walk away.
Right. Yeah.
And I'll have relationships too where people are like, I don't have time for this. I'm sorry, it's too much for me right now, and I'll be okay with it. Yeah. And then those people almost certainly will turn around. You'll find that those people will turn around and be like, well, but what about this?
Huh.
Those people who should be a part of your dream team, so people who should be a part of your social net, will almost always give you an alternative. Even if it's not right away, they'll be like, well, why don't we try doing this? And it may not be as big of a thing, or as or as intensive, but they'll usually be like, well, can we do this smaller thing? I have found. And
so the idea changes.
So the idea changes, and you have to be flexible, and you have to not, be rigid in your thinking of how other people fit in your world. Like that mentality of the hierarchy of your social, workings,
right?
Like those kids had. If you can change your idea of where somebody fits in your world, that can be okay too.
Yeah.
And I've had that happen too. I've gone from like seeing these people all the time, working with these people all the time, and suddenly they have too many commitments, they have too many responsibilities, they have too many things going on, and it won't be me like force myself to try and help them or anything like that. They don't need that. They just need just change a little bit of where you are, in relation to them. And that can be just as good too.
I feel like you're echoing so many artists in Los Angeles who go through the ebb and flow of trying to create things, trying to bring just a team around something to create something.
Yeah.
And some things go through and some things don't. And
it can be very disappointing and very disheartening.
Yeah.
But eventually you have to get to the point where you're like, this is okay. What's happening in front of me is okay, and I what I have I can make something out of.
Yeah.
Old saying people have been saying forever, you get lemons and you make lemonade. And that's not just that lemonades are bad. It's just everything has its utility and reason for being there. And if you're like pushing up against it, like, why isn't this working? Why can't I just chomp into this lemon and eat it like an apple?
Right.
The lesson of the lemons and the lemonade isn't that lemons are bad. It's just you can't eat it like an apple.
Right. And then the audience who drinks the lemonade later, they're going to have no idea that originally it started as an apple.
Right.
They're going to be like, oh, we love this lemonade.
Exactly.
And you're the only one that's like, oh my gosh, I've gone with this thing through all of its changes. This is not what it was supposed to be in the beginning, but
it's not what I intended,
Right.
And you could have never made that delicious thing with what you had originally,
Right. Yeah.
You just have to be willing to take things for what they are.
So I think we should transition into Henry.
Okay.
Even though this is a good tangent. Oh, did I answer your question though originally? Because you wanted me to share the story.
Yeah, that was perfect.
Okay.
Do you want me to start with Dawn, because we didn't get to Dawn beforehand?
Well, I wanted to start with you talking about how did you meet Dawn? Yeah, because you said that you were in school for English.
I was, and I just realized just a little bit ago that when most people think of an English degree, they think of someone who's really good at language. But I'm not. I'm not good with language. I'm really good with ideas. Language is just a way of, for me, communicating really interesting ideas that I like taking apart. So I really like literature, I really like movies, or I really like all of those things. But it's always the emotions and ideas and things about a person that I like dissecting.
Yeah.
So it's not really the language itself. So I've tried learning Spanish. I've tried so hard because I'm Mexican, but I've just never been able to get it quite right. And I learned French just long enough to go to France for a little bit, for like a week. But even then it was just a constant, like just barely having enough to be, to ask people for things and to know where things were. But then as soon as I left, it was all gone. So I just don't have a mind for language.
I always felt like English, if you majored in English, it was like an open door to something different.
Yeah.
It was
how
like
I
a
took
starter
it.
course.
I took it. What I really loved most about my English degree is I got to take so many other classes. There were so few required classes that I filled up everything else with as many kinds of things that I could: astronomy, physics, philosophy, religion, political science. I just took every kind of course imaginable, and I love that. It was a wonderful time. I completely changed, not exactly who I was, but how I wanted to present myself. I calmed down a bit. I got less interested in having every interaction have to have an endpoint that I found acceptable. And I did that by like opening myself up. And what I would do is I would go around to these cafeterias and just sit down and talk to somebody. Start a conversation. These cafeterias were very open.
Yeah.
And it was a much looser, kind of easier time to talk with people. There was a kind of sense that you're there, so it's okay.
Yeah. We're like all strangers together.
Right.
So it's okay to talk to each other.
Exactly. So I would just start up a conversation, and I purposefully, at that time, made a decision to not be interested in anything that could happen because of that conversation. So especially talking to girls, which I was so, far away from being comfortable with, I decided to just take that out of the equation and just be like, well, what if you just talked about what was interesting to you? And sometimes it would be very nice and pleasant, and I'd just go on my way, and that'd be fine. Or, the conversation wouldn't go anywhere, and, that's fine too. I finished my meal and I left. And it was such a release. It was so freeing to not worry about these things, So my third year in college, I was living in an apartment that was only somewhat connected to the school, but they had their own cafeteria. And I had finished my meal, and I saw Dawn sit down to eat. And I just decided, okay, I'll just talk to her, I guess. And she was not that interested in talking. But
why were you interested in talking with her?
I can't say exactly what it was. Sometimes it can just be the simplest things. She had long, straight, dark hair. I'm like, good enough a reason as any to talk to somebody. Just find out what kind of person this is, or, just go on my way. Whatever.
Yeah.
So I talked with her just a little bit. I was done with my meal, so I went and got their little soft serve. And she specifically said that the chocolate there tasted like ass. And I was like, wow, geez, that's a strong opinion. And then she started talking about how she she had been a cross-country skier and had a horrible injury. And she started describing it. And I thought this was the most interesting thing in the world. I found out later she was trying to get rid of me. And by
grossing you out?
Yeah.
She's trying to gross you out and drive you away?
Yeah, exactly. That's exactly what she was trying to do. And instead I went from like, yeah, okay, sure, whatever. This is one of 1,000 conversations I'm having to this is the most interesting thing I've ever heard in my life. And so, I ended up talking with her more, and a lot of this stuff is things that I found out later.
Right.
She says as she was talking to me, the fact that I was so interested eventually made her more interested in talking with me about different things. And the more she talked with me, the more she became interested in talking to me, to the point where after she was done with dinner, we walked back because this wasn't exactly connected to the apartment building. It was a little separated out because they were two apartment buildings. We walked back to where we both lived. I thought, oh, that's real nice. I'll talk to her again. And it was really as simple as that. It was not like the world ended when I met her,
Yeah.
It was just a really great interaction, though she wasn't that, interested in it. But I won her over, I think, with ardor. And I was just really, really interested in talking with her. it went very slowly, Eventually, I invited her to do things with my friends, that we were going to do anyway. Mm-hmm. And then I would invite her to do things with me that I was going to do anyway. And then we went on dates.
So you guys really started off as friends?
Not,
You became friends first.
Only for maybe, I wouldn't even say friends. I would say acquaintances. Because, it wasn't like I relied on her. Mm-hmm. It was just she was someone nice to talk to while we were eating. And this was only for maybe a week, 2 weeks, or 3 weeks,
Okay.
That was a very short period of time. Because, after the first couple interactions, I had it in my mind, maybe there's something here. It doesn't need to happen right now.
Yeah.
Because I don't want to... Because the biggest problem I had before was I'm just so intense in my personality. It freak people out. There's so much of me, all the time, that it's sometimes hard for people to deal with. So I decided to just try and be casual about it. And it ended up working very well, even though it was only the second date where I was like, you should just be together now, I guess. And she was like, yeah, okay.
Like, do you want to be my girlfriend type of conversation?
Yeah. And, it's after our first actual date, she kissed me first. And that was very nice. So I knew I was on pretty solid footing. Mm-hmm. I didn't, it only took another date for me to realize I don't really want to, I don't want to try anything else out here. I just, let's see how this goes.
Yeah. What was your first actual date?
Well, see, it was such a transition, Mm-hmm. It could have been us going to see, I would just go downtown from the university just to hang out and look at things and look at music and stuff like that. And she went with me, and the fact that she went with me prompted me to go see The Man Who Wasn't There, which I wouldn't have gone to, if I wouldn't have done if she wasn't there with me. Mm-hmm. That was pretty much like our first date. Okay. But it wasn't really like codified there, it wasn't like I asked her out. Mm-hmm. And then it was the next time that I was like, okay, let me, my dad's here over the weekend, so I'll borrow his car and I'll drive you to the movies, and instead of us going on the bus, and we'll go see a much more date-like movie, which was Ocean's 11, and because I asked you, I'll pay for it and everything. And that was when, after that date, that I was like, we'll just be boyfriend and girlfriend. Mm-hmm. And she was like, yeah, okay.
That's a great beginning.
It was, and it ended up just keep on going on, Mm-hmm. I never considered once being like, wow, this has run its course. The course seems to have just kept on going. I don't know how else to explain it. I don't really relate with how other people talk about their relationships, that it gets to that ending point, or you end up, completely on opposite ends of feeling for each other. It's just kind of kept on the same level.
Steady is a steady course.
Yeah.
I don't know. Sometimes I feel like a lot of people are in a hurry. Mm-hmm. Even I can be in a hurry. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And so the pacing is not really set correctly.
Right.
So everybody, the stride runs out.
Yeah.
But it sounds like you were okay from the beginning, and it sounds like she was too. It's just like easing into it and just taking it a step at a time.
And then once we graduated, I wanted to go to LA. Mm-hmm. Neither of us had very good jobs. She didn't know what she was going to do. So she stayed in Santa Barbara, and I stayed with her for about 9 or 10 months. And then because I was substitute teaching, it became the summer, and I didn't want to not have as much money and still be depending on her. Mm-hmm. So I moved back in with my parents. I worked 2 different jobs to try and, have enough money. But
in LA?
In LA, yeah.
Okay. And she was still in Santa Barbara?
She stayed in Santa Barbara, and that was probably the hardest time. Mm-hmm. when we were only an hour and a half apart. But it still felt like, I wish we could be, like we were spending every day together up until that point.
Right.
So that it was hard to not be with her every day like I had been. I wanted to, there were so many things in LA that I was going to try. None of them ended up working out. None of those things ended up being things that I would stick with.
But you needed to try them.
But I needed it because they were things I had been thinking about my entire life. Things like stand-up comedy or taking classes at the Groundlings. And those were things that like I had been thinking about my entire life. But once I actually did them, they weren't the paths that I was meant to take. But I encouraged her to do grad school. So she was a major in geography. And so she went to grad school for environmental science. And it's funny, she's a geography major, but she has a terrible sense of direction. 100%. If you took her someplace and showed her the route to go there, she could not come the way back. For at least months of going the same. If you did you'd have to do this for months before she would finally have it set, Yeah. And what she'll do instead is I found out, this is really fascinating because when I found out that ants do this, I was incredibly excited because I was like, Don, you do this. This is exactly what you do. When ants get lost, if you ever seen if you see like A Bug's Life, the joke of them like not being in the line anymore. So they're like, oh, I don't know where to go.
I've actually not seen that movie.
Oh, okay.
But I'm like...
You're aware of the phenomenon of ants getting lost?
No, I'm not.
Because they go in a line, and they smell the ant, not person, but the ant that's in front of them.
Okay.
So if they're not in that line, they don't know where to go.
Oh, man.
So what they'll end up doing is they'll start where they are, and they'll go in wider and wider circles until they get back to where they are supposed to be, until they can smell where they're supposed to be. And that's exactly what she'll do. If we're just anywhere in a city or, anywhere at all, and she gets lost, she'll be like, okay, we go just a little bit out and then go in a circle and then a little bit out and go in a circle and then go a little bit out and go in a circle. And that's how she'll find her way back.
She just innately does that?
I figured that was her natural instinct of what to do.
When you saw that movie, you were like... Eureka?
Eureka, I have found it.
You're an ant.
So she ended up being an environmental science master. She got her master's degree. And from then she was able to get a really good job in Santa Monica. So we both moved to Santa Monica. And we kept on talking. Like, we knew we were going to have kids eventually. But it just seemed like we weren't quite at that point yet. And we wanted to be sure. We know everybody, everybody always says you're never ready for kids. You can never be ready for kids. But we wanted to be ready. We didn't want to struggle financially. We didn't want to have to him or her at that point. We didn't want them to not have things that they should. So we waited a little longer. And then it got to the point where, we probably shouldn't wait any longer. Time eventually catches up with everybody, so we should, try now. So we did. And, she got pregnant just within a couple of months, and it was real easy, it just went like everybody says. We didn't tell anybody for the first 3 months like you're supposed to. There's just so many things you don't find out that people don't talk about with pregnancy. Like the fact that you shouldn't go around telling everybody that you're pregnant as soon as you find out yourself, because so many pregnancies end with miscarriage in the first 3 months. But it's usually in the first 3 months. So in my mind, it was like a plane taking off. Most of the problems happen during takeoff. And once you're in the air, you're fine. So if we can just go through those first 3 months, it should be fine. We looked at the baby books and, how, thinking about where we were going to move to so that our baby could have their own room, considering exactly, what we were going to have for them at the beginning, trying to be prepared. Luckily, her gynecologist, her obstetrician, his office was right next to the hospital, St. John's Hospital in Santa Monica, and both of them were only a couple of blocks away from her work. It was real easy. Every time you go, when you're pregnant, you give a urine sample, and they take your blood pressure, because what they're looking for is preeclampsia. And when we found out about that, we actually laughed. We were like, that is ridiculous that is still a problem. Because that was how the middle daughter in Downton Abbey died. So we thought of it as like the Downton Abbey disease,
Yeah.
How do people still have a problem with a disease that was on Downton Abbey,
Even the name of it.
Yeah,
just sounds
preeclampsia.
so old. We're like,
yeah.
Aren't we beyond this?
Should be. And she always had high blood pressure. So she got off salts and, tried to do things that kept her blood pressure low. But it would sometimes still be high. So they would she would turn over onto her left side, and her blood pressure would go down a little bit,
That works?
It works, because your blood takes just a little bit longer to pump. And so it brings you down just a little bit. So that's another little tip. If you're having trouble with your heart going too fast or something, you can go on your left side and it'll slow it down a little bit.
That's a good tip, actually.
Yeah, it is a good tip. We went in for the 29-week appointment. So this was, just a little bit into the third trimester. Not even that far away from halfway through the pregnancy,
When was this? Like, what was the date of that?
December 4th. So December 4th, we went in for a 29-week appointment. She did her usual thing, and they were like, well, there's more protein in your urine than we would like, and your blood pressure is staying high. The doctor said what we would like you to do is to go over to the hospital and get a little better of checks, so that we know everything's okay. So we walked over the hospital, had nurses go over with us to take more tests and to actually take a blood test. And it was a lot of waiting to figure out what's wrong. And a lot of people deciding they had to talk with somebody else, which is probably it was the first sign that something was wrong.
Right.
When people have to when you're at the hospital and people have to consult with somebody else, that usually means I don't want to get this wrong. I don't want to tell the patient something that looks bad is bad unless I know it's bad. So let me talk with somebody else and make sure that it's right so that I can tell them that this is bad. So we're waiting there. We're talking with the nurse. And she says that it looks like it's preeclampsia. Usually the nurses will give you a little bit more of a heads up than the doctors. So they told us it looks like you'll probably have to stay rested. And when we asked for how long, she said for the rest of your pregnancy.
Wow.
And we were like, oh my gosh, you're just going to stay in bed you would have to stay in bed and work from home for the rest of your pregnancy. That would be difficult, to deal with.
Yeah, and like at this point, you said 29 weeks, so the due date was what?
February 14th.
Okay.
So yeah, it was still 2.5 months away, at least. So we went from thinking we were going to spend maybe half an hour at the obstetrician to thinking we were going to spend maybe an hour or two at the hospital. To think she was just going to have to go home and lie in bed for 2.5 months.
Wow.
And then after a while, they come in and say, actually, you're going to have to deliver the baby pretty soon, like within the next day.
Wait, so this whole time you guys are just like sitting and waiting. And people just keep coming in talking to you.
Yeah.
So you're going to be on bed rest for the rest of your pregnancy.
We're going to deliver the baby in the next day. And then we have to deliver the baby now.
What were your reactions to this?
Well,
like, what was Dawn doing?
Well, we were getting increasingly nervous. We kept on trying to hold on to the idea that, that we would just be able to go home. and continue with the pregnancy as it was. But little by little, that ended up just being chipped away. And we were having a tough time really realizing the reality of what was happening. And by the time they got to, you're gonna have to have the baby, like, it was about the time when they said you're gonna have to have the baby, like, within the next day, that we realized we have no way of dealing with this. We just have to go with what the doctors are saying. You know, there are very few decisions that we're gonna be able to make right now. You know, it got to be where it started to hit us with the reality that this was happening now, you know, and we were going to have to deal with it. And all I could think of was, this is too soon. I did not have any preparation for it happening now. And I didn't know what was going to happen next, you know, what would happen to Dawn, or what would happen to our baby, who we knew was a he at that point. And we had decided to call Henry, and that was about as far as we had gotten at that point.
Do you mean when you were like, you were not prepared, do you just mean like for a premature birth?
Yeah. I wanted to make sure that the NICU, that's the neonatal intensive care unit, was good. So when we had the hospital tour, I made sure to ask about it and see that it was like right next to the delivery and right next to the recovery rooms. But in my mind, I was thinking if there was a complication with the birth, with the delivery. That's what I had in my mind. But in my head, it was always that something would go wrong immediately. And it would be terrible. And it would be a horrible thing to happen, but it would happen, and then we would go forward. You know? Yeah. It didn't occur to me that something could happen that could potentially be something that we would have to deal with for months. When the doctor told us that the baby was going to have to be delivered now, that day, December 4th, only a few hours after we had come in for a regular checkup, I had no idea what that would mean for Dawn or for the baby. You know, I didn't even know, you know, what the baby would have to do. If the baby would have strong enough lungs to breathe on its own or breathe on his own. I really didn't have a sense of what stage of development Henry would be at. Yeah. And how dangerous it would be for him to be out at that point. So luckily we had a nurse who said, no, I had a baby that early. I don't know if she was telling the truth or not, but I'm glad she lied, frankly. She told us I had a baby that early. And it turned out fine. You know, she turned out fine. She's a healthy girl now. You know, no different from any other girl. She had no permanent problems. And so I tried to keep that in my head. But
why do you think she was lying to you?
It was because she said exactly 29 weeks. So that would be a coincidence. It would be a happy coincidence. You know, I'm just saying if she was lying to make us feel better, I'm glad she did. If she wasn't, then I'm really glad that Providence was able to give that nurse to us to be able to say that to us. So it felt better just knowing there was a possibility that everything would turn out all right. Because even at that point, I had no idea. Yeah. And I didn't know if the doctors were going to tell us, like, this is permanently going to be a problem for your child. I had no idea what the statistics were or what the odds were or what kind of problems could be happening with having a baby at 29 weeks. You know, I was trying to grab on to the few things that the doctor was saying about giving Dawn a quick shot to try and help brain development. But even that, there wasn't time for. Because at that point, she had not just preeclampsia, but also HELP syndrome, which is not only, it's not even really a disease, it's just a collection of symptoms. Nobody even told us that Dawn had HELP syndrome. It was just something the nurses said to each other. that we picked up on.
Yeah, buzzwords.
Yeah, so we had to look it up. I mean, we were frantically looking up everything that they were saying to us to try and figure out what was happening because we were so in the dark, you know. So the first person I called was my sister-in-law, Dawn's sister, you know, because she had a kid. And I knew she would be able to talk to all of my wife's family. So she got things together for us like toothbrushes and pajamas and, you know, those normal things that you should be taking with you when you're going to go have a baby.
Right.
We had nothing whatsoever with us. Meanwhile, we were getting ready for surgery, and they said to me, you know, don't listen for him crying. If he's not crying, it's okay, because babies born this early don't usually cry because their lungs are going to be so small. When the C-section started, they partitioned the lower half of where my wife was so she couldn't see, unfortunately. And I held her hand, which was shaking really hard because of the drugs they gave her, I found out. At the time, I was like really worried about her freaking out, but it turns out it was the drugs they were giving her that were making everything shake. And they took Henry out, and I heard him crying, and that was the first notice I had that he was okay and that at least his lungs were normal, you know, and working fine.
Mm-hmm. How big was he when he came out?
He was about 2 pounds. Yeah, and I didn't even get to hold him, you know. The doctors had to hold him. They offered to let me cut the umbilical cord, but I was like, I am not in a state where I can do that. They took him. They showed him to Dawn, who was a little bit out of it. You know, she could just barely, you know, be able to look and see that he was okay. And they took him into the other room, into the NICU, cleaned him off. They had to immediately put a intravenous tube in him, and let me tell you, it was rough to have to see the needle going into him. And then they can't even use tape because they're so small. So they use just a little bit of plastic that's kind of sticky. You know, because he was obviously crying. He didn't need a ventilator or anything like that. But they did put a little oxygen mask on him to be sure. And thankfully, that only lasted like a day. And then he got put on a nasal cannula, which is just those little tubes that go under the nose that you see people with. Oh, they gave him the test that they give other babies, which is called APGAR, which just tests how lively the baby is, you know, that they're breathing and moving correctly. And he did very well. You know, he did almost perfectly, considering he was so small. He was very small and very skinny because he was not getting the nutrients he needed inside of the uterus. I spent just a minute or two with Henry before I went right back to Dawn, you know, telling her everything that had happened and showing her the video. And when I went back to Dawn, they had her up, just completely up to machines, everything up to machines, you know, an IV. They had leg compressions on her. She had lost a lot of blood because of the low platelet count. And I could see her blood pressure going really high and really low. And I was just like asking, is that normal? And they had to tell me, yeah, that's, you know, it'll level off in just a little bit. I was just, you know, for that while feeling incredibly helpless. The only thing I could do was watch, you know, so I just tried to focus on trying to remember as many details as I could to tell Dawn about Henry.
What was her reaction to seeing him? When, I mean, I know she was totally medicated.
It was she was glad, you know. It was a sense that, like, okay, that turned out, that part has been done, but incredibly sad that this wasn't going to go the way that we thought, you know. We hadn't even had a baby shower, because those usually happen a month before. So nothing that we had in mind for the third trimester was going to happen. The state that she had been in of making sure the baby's okay inside of her was just completely gone now. And
Yeah.
it took a while for her to then transition to doing whatever she could for the baby. You know, she said she had to start thinking about pumping because it's very important to get the first bit of milk for him.
How long was he in the NICU for?
So Henry ended up being in the NICU for more than the 2.5 months before his due date. He ended up being there almost 3 months.
Okay.
He stayed small. He never got up to the size that even the other NICU babies were getting. He had trouble with eating. He had trouble with the formula they were giving him that was very high calorie. You know, Dawn would give milk and they'd mix that together with the formula, but even mixing it together was just like, it was a lot on his stomach.
Yeah.
I think it also was a problem that he had a inguinal hernia, which is pretty common with babies. It's the most common thing that babies come out with that they need surgery for.
What is that? What kind of a hernia is that?
It's basically like the lining, a little bit of the, to get really technical, the testicles come out, the testicles come into their scrotum, and then it's supposed to close.
Oh.
Sometimes it doesn't close. And so the little bit of, you know, what's next to there, like the baby's lower intestine, can go up against that hole and press up to it and like squeeze a little bit in there.
Oh, it sounds painful.
It looked very painful for him. So it was about almost 2 months, 1.5 months to 2 months in that we decided to give him the surgery because he was so uncomfortable with it. I needed to give him blood twice because his iron levels were low.
And you donated your blood?
I donated my blood to him.
Okay.
And that, you know, that also has to be an all-day thing. They're so small; they need a lot of time for it to go in there. So yeah, he had those issues, and then right as we thought he was going to leave, he could not take a bottle. It was a combination of not having strong mouth muscles, and he was not gaining weight. He had to go 2 consecutive days gaining weight, even after he reached his goal weight. So he was going up, but he wasn't gaining it very fast, and he was having a real trouble with drinking. So it was very difficult. The whole 3 months was a very difficult time for us.
Yeah, was Dawn mostly just like living her life at the NICU? Were both of you guys just like there?
Yeah, like I said, you know, all of the things were all together. She didn't go back to work for that time. And we were only about a 10-minute drive from the hospital. So yes, we went every day. Sometimes twice a day. We would go in the evening. Sometimes we would go late at night, you know, just to see what was happening. I mean, Henry wasn't able to tell the difference, so he was up in 3-hour intervals anyway. That was one lucky part, is that we lived so close, we were able to go every day.
Yeah.
But it was just, it took over our lives.
Yeah.
There was nothing else we were doing other than going to the NICU.
When you guys were at home at your apartment at night, were you worried about him?
Yeah. Thinking, I mean, it's all we thought about, really. I think we saw a movie. Okay, no, we went to go see more than one movie because I also went to see Star Wars. That was episode 7, you know, The Force Awakens.
Yeah.
I had bought tickets months beforehand. It was all the way in Hollywood at the Cinerama Dome. And I was, for the longest time, deciding whether to go or not. Finally, very close, we decided to go. But it was a rough time because she had to pump every 3 hours. And she was deathly afraid she was going to not pump enough. You know, so she was pumping in the car beforehand and afterwards. And the whole time I was there, all I could think about was, oh, why am I here instead of with Henry? So that was our time. Right after Henry came out, when I was still incredibly frazzled, my sister-in-law, Dawn's sister, Jennifer, who brought us all the things that we needed. She also took me to the IHOP that was right across the street from the hospital. Just that, little bit of time to not be in this whirlwind of things happening helped me immensely, and I'm so thankful for her to do that for me. And it ended up being kind of a regular occurrence, even when Dawn got out and we would come to the NICU, we would often go to the IHOP across the street just for a little bit of calm, just a little bit of normalcy.
Mm-hmm.
And it's funny that all that time later, we finally brought Henry home. There was another IHOP by where we lived. It took us a couple of days before we were even comfortable just having him in the stroller.
Mm-hmm.
But about, maybe 2 weeks after we brought him home, finally, we put him in the stroller and we walked him to the IHOP. And in the evenings, we had dinner there and there would be nobody else there. And so we would have our time there to just kind of sit and eat and have, our version of being able to go out.
Yeah.
Once or twice he would wake up, but I would just pick him up and carry him around and put him, back to sleep. It was very, very calming to be able to do that. It ended up going from being just another place like Denny's or whatever to me having this very emotional connection to IHOP now because of what happened then.
Yeah.
And then even later on, we moved from Santa Monica so that Henry could have his own room and he started to be able to eat his own food. The first place we went, and this isn't the only restaurant we go to, but it just ends up being where we go, that we end up having these milestones.
Yeah.
The first restaurant food he ate was eggs from IHOP.
Do you guys still take him there?
Right now, no, because he is having a really hard time with being in a restaurant. He is very active. He is and has always been incredibly active, even in the NICU. He figured out a way to get the nurses to take, once he got big enough that anybody could hold him and he didn't have to be connected to the monitors, they would take him off the monitors, pick him up, and carry him around the NICU, look at all the other babies, visit, and that's what he wanted. That's all he wanted was to move around. Once we took him home and he was outside for the first time, that is all he wanted to do was be outside. And still he loves being outside, but for the first few months, that was all he wanted to do was to just be outside in the cold air, moving around. It didn't matter if we were holding him or if he was in the stroller. I used to go on incredibly long walks with him, for a long time.
Mm-hmm.
Now, because he wants to be on his own power, he's walking around now. He's 2 years and 2 months now. He wants to walk around. We'll go to the playground, and all he wants to do now, he used to love climbing on things, but now all he wants to do is just walk around the park. He just has it in him to just want to explore and look around, look into things. We picked Henry. We wanted a nice, common name. Not everybody had, not the most common name, but something that would be easy to spell, that wouldn't be a family name. I'm a nerd. I like geeky things. I couldn't name him Han Solo or Indiana Jones. We were gonna give his middle name to my dad. We ended up giving it to my grandpa and my brother, so his middle name is Joaquin. My dad's name is Ricardo. I almost, as a joke, wanted to call him Deckard Ricardo. Didn't fly with Dawn. Ended up naming him Henry after Indiana Jones. And it ended up being incredibly fitting because the boy wants to explore.
And I didn't know that Indiana Jones, that his first name is Henry.
You don't find out until the third movie that his real name is Henry Jones Jr. It suits him very well.
Yes, he looks like a Henry, like exactly like a Henry. And the first thing that he did when I met him was like throw down what was in his hands and come and grab my hand and take me into his pile of toys.
Yeah,
which was really cool.
He's very personable. Another place that we loved going to was a pizza place, which he also really loves pizza. Also one of his favorite foods. But what he loves about this pizza place, not only does he get one of his favorite foods, but let's see, how old was he? Less than a year, about 11 months. We would go to this pizza place, he'd look around, and he'd find someone. He'd stare at them and smile until he got them to smile back. And then he wouldn't care anymore. It's like he was fishing for smiles. And so he would go to this place and we'd have him and he'd just look around until he could get as many people as he could smiling at him. And he's incredibly personable.
He's winning over all these hearts.
And
then he's just like,
okay, I got that. Got it. That's all I needed. Thank you. So I think he's going to be much more socially adjusted than I was, or my wife was when we were children.
He's definitely a heartthrob.
It's almost like it's so far away from what I remember as being a kid that like it's almost like raising someone with a completely different experience, you know? Raising a kid with a completely different mindset of how they look at the world.
Yeah.
And it's going to be interesting as he gets older. I mean, maybe he'll change. Maybe he'll be more like us. I hope not. I hope he stays exactly how he is. And it'll be difficult. It'll be difficult to figure out what he's thinking, you know, what he wants and how he's going about getting what he wants. He'll probably outsmart us very early. But I look forward to just every moment I'm able to have.
I was wondering if you could just share a little bit about his development process and where he's at developmentally, like if you guys had to be concerned about anything in the last few years, or if everything was fine, like this nurse had said, just so listeners can understand if you guys have had to go through anything or not.
They were a little concerned, the doctors, his pediatrician was a little concerned that like I said, he stayed small. And that his muscle development and movement motor skills weren't exactly on par with other kids. But that only took a little bit of time before he was so active. You know, if we just gave him the opportunity, he shot right up to being able to do all the things that other kids could do. We are having a difficulty right now with him talking. He still has not talked. As I said, he's about 2 years and 2 months. What's crazy is that more than a year ago, he started saying the pre-words, you know, that most kids say, mama, dada. He stopped. And he'll learn a word and he'll say it once or twice, and then he'll stop. We've given him sign language. He does that very well to get what he wants. But I think what it is he's gotten so used to going the easy way with what he's figured out the easiest ways to get what he wants, and he uses those. And he knows, you know, all he has to do is grab our hand and point and, you know, look at particular things, and he'll get across what he wants to us. We want to provide him with whatever he wants, you know, so we very rarely don't have the things that he wants available to him. That's the best idea I have. You never know until, you know, you're past it, what exactly the problem is. But as of now, he's just not using language like other kids are. I'm okay with whenever he decides to start talking, you know, actually using speech to say what he wants.
Yeah.
I know Don didn't talk until a little later, but that was still like 2.5. I know other kids sometimes don't, but we're just going to have to see. I don't think it's anything specific to being a premature baby. I think it's just his personality. Mm-hmm. He always wants to find the easiest way to get what he wants. Mm-hmm. And once he's got it, he doesn't care how he got it.
He's very smart.
Yeah, he is. I never question that he's an intelligent kid, you know, because he always seems to be thinking and considering and figuring things out. Mm-hmm. So that's never an issue. Mm-hmm. It's just a worry of like, well, you know, kid, biologically, you have to figure, you know, you have to use these muscles eventually, you know, or else you're not gonna develop at the same rate as everybody else.
Yeah, I feel like there are some things that you only learn when you want to make a friend.
Yeah.
You're like, oh, I gotta actually do these. Like these things are acceptable when you want to make friends. So you have to try a little harder sometimes.
Right. And so I think sending him to daycare maybe once a week, I think will probably help him out. Mm. He does like hanging out with other kids. He is very social in that regard. And other kids his age aren't going to be as amenable as adults with getting him what he wants. Yeah. So that might be a little bit of the push that he needs.
I do like that he's non-discriminatory. Like he even wanted to play with me. Yeah. I was like, oh, I'm a kid with him too now.
He's just has a way of making everybody feel a little special. Mm-hmm. You know, he has that natural human politics figured out of how to connect with everybody. You know.
Yeah, he's diplomatic.
Very much so.
The last thing I was wondering is, during that time that you and Don realized, like, oh my gosh, you know, like you guys are just getting ready for your day like normal. Mm-hmm. You show up for this appointment and your whole world gets flipped. Did spirituality play a part in any of this for you?
You know, it's strange. I remember when my sister-in-law was having her kid, there was a brief amount of time where it seemed like something might be wrong. And when that happened, I prayed that everything would turn out all right. But when this happened, I did end up praying, but it ended up being that all three of us could be strong enough to keep going no matter what. At that point, I think I realized what was most important to me was for us, all three of us, you know, that at that point we were so connected that I couldn't ask for anything, any one thing in particular. Mm-hmm. I could only ask for us all to support each other and to keep each other strong. It gave me a very different idea of how I related to myself and Don. And for a while, I had looked at, you know, Don and us as Don and I as a unit, you know. And then when Henry came aboard, almost immediately, I felt that push and pull of all three of us, and how it's in some ways stronger and in some ways much more difficult to have these three units completely connected, and what happens to one completely affects the other one.
Wow.
Yeah, it was difficult to figure out how I looked at the world for what I wanted. When you're just on your own, you know, you see yourself going down a path and you think about what you want, where you want to end up. And even when it's two of you adults, you know, it's easy to kind of meld them together and you know, say, as long as we're going down this path, it's okay. And we'll be able to figure out, and this is another grown adult that you'll be able to, you know, lean on and support. But now with Henry, it's like, oh, here's this part of me that's outside and I have no control over. Mm-hmm. But it's me. You know, I can't deny that this is a part of me that I that's going to live longer than me. That's going to, you know, take my ideas and my values and everything about me and create something completely new. But I also have no control over it. I don't know if that exactly answers the question, but
it's a beautiful answer, Cruz.
Yeah. I wish I could say at the very end, looking back on everything that happened, I wish I could have been more accepting and supportive of Dawn's intense feelings during those times we were in the NICU. I wanted everything to be okay. Mm-hmm. And I tried to continue that everything would be okay. And I was not willing to accept that things were not okay for a while. I tried to be as supportive as I could, but with that kind of block, there was only so much I could support Dawn. And I wish if I could change things, if I could go back, I wish I could be more open and accepting and realize that, you know, just trying to get through it was not an entirely healthy way of looking at the situation. To try and minimize the dangers. You know, I should have just let them go and go where they were going to go. But you want everything to be okay. It's not always going to be okay. Hopefully things will be not as intense in the future. But, you know, this is the way with children. There's always something. We recently, during the last cold season, he got so sick, and he was sick for almost a month. He got croup, he got an ear infection, he got the flu, he had a fever almost every day for almost a month.
Wow.
And that was an intense time to go through. I think that time, because we had gone through the NICU experience, we were both able to handle it a bit better, you know, and weather it in a way that we both understood that it would eventually be over, but also be willing to, at least on my part, be willing to say, yes, right now is bad. And if it's just going to be bad for right now, then I got to accept that it's going to be bad for right now and live with it being bad for right now and not try and minimize it in any way.
I really appreciate hearing your story because it's interesting to hear from a father's point of view.
Yeah, well, it's the only point of view that I can have.
But I was wondering what made you want to share this whole story.
I've had it in me for a while. I've run it through my head a lot. These feelings I had. You know, I've always thought that it's the most intense feelings and experiences that you turn into the best art because it's supposed to be your expression. But I could never figure out how I could look at this experience and turn it into something that, you know, was creative. I felt like this was the only thing that I could do. Thank you for letting me monopolize the conversation, because in my head, it feels somewhat crass to say that I'm going to take, you know, my son and my wife almost dying and turn it into a piece of art for myself. But I could only have it in me for so long until I could try and shape it into something that feels not just a part of my life, but something beautiful. And I want to thank you, because this is the only way that I could think of that I could shape that experience into something that is more than just a shitty thing that happened, into something that I feel actually proud of, you know.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm really glad I was able to come here and tell this story. Now, when I look back on it, you know, I can look at Facebook when it says, you know, on this day,
mm-hmm.
and I got to go through these specific months. I know I could just say, don't remind me every year, but when I look back on this time, telling this story now and getting it all out, I can feel like, okay, yeah, that was something altogether that shaped me now, but it also made for this beautiful story.
Mm.
I don't know. I think it's just something in me that I can't just let life exist without making it something that can be appreciated. I don't know if it's healthy or not, but, you know, I try to do my best with it.
Sometimes in these traumatic life situations, there's so many angles of view that we pick up
Mm-hmm.
when it's all happening at once. And like you were saying, it's been living inside of you,
Mm-hmm.
all these thoughts and these emotions. And like, I mean, there's so many experiences that you had just in that particular day.
Yes.
And it only makes sense to
Organize it.
Yeah, organize it and at least begin the crafting of it.
Mm-hmm.
So you probably share it again somewhere else. But also, I think, I mean, Henry's okay.
Mm-hmm.
But even in being able to share the story with somebody is almost like healing in a certain sense to help realize how beautiful the experience actually was in some aspects, instead of like, oh, this was just like the hardest thing. We were not prepared.
Mm-hmm.
You know, all those facts that, you know,
Mm-hmm.
there's the IHOP of it all,
Mm-hmm.
which is a beautiful thread
Mm-hmm.
through that story. And it's neat to see the glittery threads in the midst of hardship.
Yeah, I think that's incredibly necessary. I think it's necessary for everybody's story of their lives, so that when you look back on this day, you don't just see, oh God, that was terrible.
Right,
I felt so bad at that moment. When we can make something out of it like this, when we're able to get all the perspectives together, it turns into something that we can hold together as something beautiful and cherish.
Well, thank you for trusting me with your story. Sometimes I ask people at the end of an interview if they have anything that they want to share with the listener,
Mm-hmm.
but I'm actually wondering if you have anything that you'd like to share with Henry for the future, because this could be like an archived thing for him.
Yeah, I think I can see that. Okay. Henry, if you're listening to this all these years later, whether you're 7 or 10 or however many years old you are, I just want you to know that your mom and dad loved you very much from the very beginning. And when you were born, it was very scary for both of us. But the joy that you've given our lives every day has made it worth it. You, from the very beginning, have come into our lives with such light and brightness that everything you see makes me happy to be alive on earth. Know that you make us so happy that no matter what the circumstances were and what we had to go through, I am glad for every part of our journey. If it made you, it was all worth it.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
If you'd like to see pictures of Cruz along with Dawn and Henry, You can find them on my site, ColleenLindell.com, or you can find a link to my site in this episode's description, which you can find wherever you are currently listening to this episode. There's also a link to Cruz's podcast, A Quality Interruption, which he co-hosts with his friend James Kislingberry. Again, I highly recommend checking that out if you're into all things relating to film. Just a reminder, the next episode will be on student loan debt, specifically highlighting Hillary Carroll and how she paid off her debt, which totaled $130,000, and that episode will be up in the next few weeks. Music playing underneath this by the artist Home off his album Resting State. You can find more music by Home on Bandcamp.com. This episode of Mostly Minutia was recorded in my kitchen in Glendale, California.